Hollywood, the home of the rich and the famous, the birthplace of cinema. The glamour, the riches, and the lifestyles leave us hanging on their every moment. But not all of its secrets are the glitzy success stories they seem. In fact, Hollywood, whilst propelling some to superstardom, has chewed up and spat out more ambitious hopefuls than you or I have had hot dinners. It has been host to scandal, murder, crime, and every inch of it has a secret to spill, if somebody's listening. Some of those will go to the grave, and some are already talking from beyond it. Hollywood has always been home to the devious, whether it be money-pinching studios, payroll drug dealers, shady fixers, mobsters, or simply stars with too much money and little to no inhibitions. It's time to peek behind the curtain. Let's take a look at some of the ghosts of the past and what macabre tales they have to tell. The Hollywood sign is one of the most recognized landmarks in the world. The rich and the famous bask above its view, and tourists flock to get a glimpse of it below. The epitome of heaven and hell to those desperate to taste stardom. Originally, the sign, erected in 1923 as a real estate advertisement, read Hollywoodland, an impressive feat of advertising even when compared to today's standards, as it was studded with 4,000 light bulbs, which would flash in 3 separate segments: Holly, Wood, and Land, though the latter was removed in 1949. As awe-inspiring as the sign was to so many who lavished the lands and found success in Hollywood, it was a constant reminder to those who were yet to find their own big break, just how vast the journey to stardom could be. One such young actress was Peg Entwistle. Entwistle moved to Los Angeles in 1932 with visions of success in the latest innovation to sweep the industry, the talkies. However, like many others, Entwistle found only disappointment. She lived at her uncle's house on Beechwood Drive, quite literally under the shadow of the Hollywood sign. Peg told away at audition after audition. As an up-and-coming actress on Broadway, she hoped the transition from stage to screen would be lined with far less disappointment. But Tinseltown is ferocious, and she struggled to stand apart in a sea of other hopefuls. She did get her first big role in David O. Selznick's 13 Women, but disappointingly, her role was cut from the final film. September 16, 1932, was the final straw. Reportedly intoxicated and unable to console her grief any longer, Peg told her uncle she was meeting friends for the evening, but instead walked off into the darkness. The hike took her towards the bright lights of the sign. Climbing up the maintenance ladder to the very top of the letter H, Peg Entwistle threw herself into its shadow. With each letter standing 50 feet high, she plummeted to her death. She was 24 years old. The next day, an unidentified hiker discovered a number of Peg's personal items during her hike. Transcript of a call to the Los Angeles Police Department by an anonymous caller. I was hiking near the Hollywoodland sign today, and near the bottom, I found a woman's shoe and jacket. A little further on, I noticed a purse. In it was a suicide note. I looked down the mountain and saw a body. I don't want any publicity in this matter, so I wrapped up the jacket, shoes, and purse in a bundle and laid them on the steps of the Hollywood police station. A few hours later, police found Peg's body some 100 feet down the side of the ravine. To this day, Peg Entwistle remains the only documented case of suicide connected to jumping off the Hollywood sign. Transcript of Peg Entwistle's suicide note. I am afraid I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain. P.E. The LA Times published the letter in hopes that she would be identified and affectionately dubbed her the Hollywood sign. However, their plan worked. Her uncle Harold recognized the initials and identified Peg's body in the wall. In a tragic twist torn straight from the pages of a noir script, shortly after her death, a letter from Bliss Hayden School of Acting, which would eventually be renamed the Beverly Hills Playhouse, arrived at her uncle's home, addressed to Peg. They wanted her to star in their next production, which, ironically enough, was about a young girl who commits suicide. The raw tale of an aspiring young talent, tragically neglected by the bright lights, certainly caught the attention of the public. But the series of strange events which preceded the tragedy made a ghostly tale that is still experienced to this day. In the early 1940s, Albert Koth, the sign's official caretaker, caused an accident which completely destroyed the letter H. Koth, driving while intoxicated, was nearing the top of Mount Lee when he lost control of his vehicle and drove off the cliff directly behind the H. While Koth was not injured, his 1928 Ford Model A was destroyed, as was the original 50-foot-tall illuminated letter H. The mysterious nature of the damage was not initially well publicized, and naturally rumors and stories instead took precedent that perhaps the collapse of the letter that Peg chose to end her life was haunted. The sign continued to fall into further disrepair, and eventually the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce decided to repair the sign, but with some changes. The word land would be removed from the sign to reflect the famous area, rather than the housing development it was initially intended to advertise. The light globes were forsaken too, since the chamber didn't want to be responsible for such a costly gift. Over the years since, Griffith Park rangers and visitors have reported seeing the ghost of the Hollywood sign, especially on particularly foggy nights. They report that the specter is typically accompanied by the smell of gardenias, reported to be the scent of Entwistle's favorite perfume. In extreme sightings, some claim to have witnessed a woman leaping from the landmark into the mist. Some believe that the energy of the tragic event was so intense that it left an imprint of the moment. Megan Santos was jogging her usual path on the Griffith Trails, high above Los Angeles, on a late night when she started to sneeze. She was overcome by what she described as a weird feeling and the overpowering scent of gardenias. She reported, and then there was this woman with blonde hair, and she seemed to be, like, walking on air. I immediately ran the other way. A young couple, hiking the same trail, stopped dead in their tracks when a disorientated blonde woman, dressed in 1930s clothing, reportedly vanished before their eyes. When the restoration took place, the original sign was thought to be lost. Until, of course, the internet gave opportunity to uncover past treasures and sell them on for a hefty price tag. The letter H is now owned by Minnesotan artist Billy Mack, who creates beautiful murals to Hollywood royalty upon it. Does he also carry a residual piece of Peg's energy with it? The sign itself is protected by a non-profit, the Hollywood Sign Trust. Its site and the surrounding land, however, are part of Griffith Park, which is no stranger to strange happenings and carries a dark history of its own. It is said to be walked by numerous ghosts and houses of curse. Perhaps that's one of the reasons it has been the scene of an alarming number of murders. In 2016, a pair of hikers stumbled upon a human skull laying partially uncovered on a little used side trail. The trail is within a stone's throw of the sign. No evidence of a crime scene was found. A forensic anthropologist with the coroner's office determined that the skull belonged to a woman who was at least 20 at the time of her death. The fragment of bone is believed to have been lying in the park for at least 1 year and as many as 10, but it's still not clear who the woman was or how she died. The skull's discovery comes in after human remains were found in the same area. In 2012, 2 women walking their dog made a gruesome discovery on one of the park's hiking trails below the Hollywood sign. It was a severed head wrapped in a plastic bag. A day later, investigators scouring the scene found more body parts, hands and feet buried in a shallow grave. A fingerprint test would identify the remains as belonging to 66-year-old Hervey Medellin, a former Mexicana Airlines employee. Park rangers found a dead body burning and hanging from a tree near the Griffith Park merry-go-round, police said. 2022, another man's body found in the park last year turned out to belong to a 24-year-old who had been convicted of meeting minors for sex, according to LAist. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office said that it was an apparent suicide. In 1933, at least 29 civilian workers were killed when a wildfire swept through the park. With so much death and tragedy, perhaps the stories of a curse on the land have some merit. Originally, all this land belonged to the Felizes and was called Rancho Los Feliz. Eventually, it became the property of Don Antonio Feliz, who resided on the land with his sister named Soledad and his 17-year-old blind niece, Dona Petronilla. In 1863, Don Antonio Feliz passed away, and instead of leaving his land to his family, he left all of it to Don Antonio Coronel. A surprise to all, However, it's believed that when Feliz was wasting away with smallpox and on his deathbed, Don Antonio Coronel visited him with a lawyer, Don Inocente. Supposedly, these two gentlemen drew up the will, and the story claims that a stick was attached to the back of Don Antonio Feliz to help the poor dying man nod his head in agreement to the new will. But the land, the lion's share of the wealth, went to Don Coronel, and Petronilla received nothing. Dona Petronilla was, to say the least, obviously not pleased. Don Feliz's niece laid down a curse on the land, Don Coronel, Don Inocente, and even the judge that upheld the will's legality. Afterwards, in order to put the final touch on the curse, she apparently dropped dead. If you believe the stories, the lawyer Don Inocente was soon shot and killed, and the judge apparently also met an untimely end. Don Coronel's family supposedly slowly died of misfortune and disease. When Coronel passed away, he left the land to his young wife, who promptly remarried. Her new husband and her fought over the inheritance, and in the ensuing divorce, the lawyers consumed most of the inheritance. In late 1868, a C.V. Howard owned part of the land and sold of the land's water rights for a nice tidy profit. He was supposedly shot at a saloon while celebrating his good fortune. The land eventually passed to Leon Lucky Baldwin, whose lucky streak immediately ended when he started a ranch and dairy on the property. The cattle on the land died, fires destroyed grain, grasshoppers devoured crops, and nothing basically went right. After he went bankrupted and was forced to sell the land to pay for the mortgage, Baldwin was supposedly gunned down by an outlaw. Some stories say Mexican bandits. The land ended up with a Thomas Bell, a financier from San Francisco. He didn't hold the land long, though, before selling it to Colonel Griffith J. Griffith. Bell apparently lived into his 80s and then fell from his mansion's banister, or was pushed by mistress, depending on the story, you believe. He allowed a man named Frank Birkin to start an ostrich farm on the property to lure residents to the area and Griffith's other surrounding properties. By 1884, the curse popped up again as a huge storm racked the land. Lightning came down upon some of the oak trees on the property, and the ranch hands claimed to see Don Antonio Feliz riding the rain. Don Antonio continued to haunt the land after the storm, often appearing near an area called B Rock. Griffith refused to visit the land except at midday, and the stories claim that the ostriches stampeded at night. With ghosts appearing and ostriches stampeding, Griffith eventually foreclosed on the ostrich farm, which was failing, causing Burkett to vow vengeance. Burkett ended up attempting to gun down Griffith with a shotgun outside Old Calvary Cemetery, now Cathedral High School on North Broadway. Burkett apparently used birdshot instead of buckshot, which was the only reason Griffith survived. Apparently, Burkett thought he had succeeded in killing Griffith, so he committed suicide with a revolver to the head. The land later became the grounds of the Griffith Park Zoo. To escape the curse, but not wanting to be out of pocket, in 1896, the Griffiths presented what they called a Christmas present to the plain people of the city, a staggering 3,015 acres of Rancho Los Feliz. The gift came with one condition. As Griffith told City Council, it must be made a place of rest and relaxation for the masses, a resort for the rank and file, for the plain people. I consider it my obligation to make Los Angeles a happy, cleaner, and finer city. I wish to pay my debt of duty in this way to the community in which I have prospered. He eventually took a preemptive strike and shot his wife while they stayed at the Arcadia Hotel in Santa Monica. Although she survived, having to throw herself from the window, land on an awning and crawl to safety through yet another window, she was disfigured and blind in one eye afterwards. Griffith served only 2 years in San Quentin for attempted murder, but his reputation was never the same. After he was released from prison, the city ignored his attempts to continue building up Griffith Park, wanting nothing officially to do with him. Griffith did, however, set up a trust fund to have his improvements, the observatory and Greek theater, built and cared for after he passed away. To defend him, Griffith hired the Johnny Cochran of his day, Earl Rogers, who would, over the course of his career, defend 77 accused murders. He lost only 3 times and would become the inspiration for the title character in the book series Perry Mason. later adapted for both radio and TV. For Griffith's trial, Rogers employed an untested tactic, an early precursor to the Twinkie defense, the booze defense. Rogers argued that Griffith was not guilty by reason of alcoholic insanity. Witnesses testified to Griffith's alcoholism and paranoid behavior. Even Tina, her disfigured face hidden behind a veil, confirmed under cross-examination that her husband was an alcoholic prone to wild, delusional outbursts. The jury had no choice but to acquit Griffith of attempted murder, although they convicted him of a lesser charge, assault with a deadly weapon. The judge gave him 2 years in San Quentin and ordered that he be given medical aid for his condition of alcoholic insanity. Working her way up as a dancer and an extra, Jean Spangler was intent on making it in Hollywood when she vanished at the age of 27 on October 1949. Her purse, with a torn handle and a cryptic note, was found 2 days later in Los Angeles' Griffith Park, but Spangler herself was never seen again. In their efforts to find her, police considered every possibility: a botched abortion, an ex-husband battling for custody of their young daughter, the mafia, one of the world's most famous actors, and, perhaps the most shocking, headline-grabbing option of all, the notorious Black Dahlia killer. More than 70 years later, Spangler's disappearance still haunts the City of Angels. Was she the victim of medical malfeasance, the rage of a jealous lover spurned, the diabolical plot of an ex-spouse to assume full parental control, or a killer far more prolific and sinister? Among the items found inside Spangler's purse was a handwritten note addressed to someone by the name of, and read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer. Going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away." The note ended in a comma, as though unfinished. After examining the note in Spangler's purse, investigators turned to the best-known Kirk in the country, movie star Kirk Douglas, who'd worked with her. Douglas spoke with police over the phone while vacationing in Palm Springs. "I told Detective Chief Thad Brown that I didn't remember the girl or the name until a friend recalled it was she who worked as an extra in a scene with me in my picture." Young man with a horn, Douglas, who died in 2020, was quoted as saying in the October 13, 1949 issue of the San Bernardino Sun, "Then I recalled that she was a tall girl in a green dress and that I talked and kidded with her a bit on the set, as I have done with many other people. But I never saw her before or after that, and have never been out with her." Spangler's mother remembered her daughter mentioning a Kirk she met on set, but she had no recollection of what studio he might have worked at because of the transient nature of her daughter's day player work. Meanwhile, Robert Cummings informed police that Spangler had told him a week prior to her disappearance that she was involved in a new romance. "I asked her if it was serious," he told the Los Angeles Times. "She said, 'Not exactly, but I'm having the time of my life.' Could Kirk be the new Beau she alluded to?" The true identity of Kirk remains a mystery. The suspicion towards Kirk Douglas grew when he phoned the police and told them that he had never met Spangler, but later changed his story to say that he did remember her, but had had no contact with her. It was also believed that because she danced in nightclubs that were frequented by men involved in the mafia, she could have been mixed up in something terrible with them, which led to her disappearance. However, this theory has never been proven. Is she yet another soul lost to the curse of the land? Is she forever lost to the shadows of Griffith Park? Today, the park and observatory that share his name are world famous. The attempted murder of his wife is long forgotten. The moral of the story: in Los Angeles, if you're rich enough and patient enough, you can get away with anything. Maybe that's why Griffith Park, the place gifted to the lowly society, has become their unofficial cemetery. So, is this ghostly apparition yet another victim in a long line paying for the sins of a curse in a time they weren't even born? It's one of the oldest buildings on the Strip, with arguably the most checkered history of violence and despair, a magnet for misfortune and synonymous with death. Its origins were humble enough. Built in 1921, it was a grocery store serving a growing community. So how did this plot of Hollywood history descend into what some describe as a portal of darkness? Converted to a nightclub in 1946, renowned mobster Mickey Cohen purchased the Viper Room, then known as the grocery store Young's Market, and transformed it into a jazz joint called the Cotton Club. The club served as a front for the headquarters of his mob operations, which took place in the building's basement. By 1950, the club had rebranded 3 separate times and reopened as a strip club following a fire that caused significant damage. It was 31 October 1993, barely 2 months after Mr. Johnny Depp and a business partner had bought a 51% share in the Viper Room, and already it was known as one of LA's coolest spots. It was a place where rock stars and young Hollywood could let loose without fear of paparazzi, a place where legends played and other legends in the audience would routinely jump up on stage and join them. None of the ghosts are River, Miss Fiora says, but he's not the only person who died here. People talk about the 1990s, when it was Johnny's place, but that stage goes back to the 1940s. The Viper Room sits on the Sunset Strip at the western end of Sunset Boulevard, where it bumps up against Beverly Hills. This stretch of the most storied boulevard in Los Angeles has enjoyed a mythic place in pop culture thanks to decade-defining venues such as the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Roxy. Of all the hallowed venues that remain, though, the Viper is the first, the original, and the least tampered with. The Whiskey has its Doors legends, and the Roxy has the biggest room, the loudest stage. But the Viper Room is gem-like, small and perfectly formed. The acoustics are impeccable, and it's so intimate that it's filled to capacity with only 196 people. It's also essentially the same room as in the 1940s. If those walls could talk, they'd have stories from the days of the mobster Mr. Bugsy Siegel. It was Mr. Tom Waits that suggested to Mr. Depp that he buy the place. He even proposed the name, the Viper Room. And at the time, Mr. Depp craved a private sanctuary for him and his friends. "I wanted a place to escape," he once said. And so he relaunched the venue. It became known as Johnny's Place, not to be confused with Johnny's Booth, which is an actual VIP area at the club. He had it built specially, says Miss Fiora. You can't see into it because of the one-way glass, but you can see out and watch the gig. The star-studded launch featured a set by none other than Mr. Tom Petty, and a crowd that put the Grammys and the Oscars to shame. Instantly, the Viper Room was the place. Stars realized it was a safe place to party, and so they did. Stories abound of Miss Kate Moss behind the bar, or Mr. Quentin Tarantino crawling around on the floor looking for his wallet yelling, "It says bad motherfucker on it." And on top of it all, there was burlesque, in keeping with the venue's illicit traditions. Mr. Depp specifically wanted it that way. The Pussycat Dolls had a residency there for 6 years, long before they took on the later Don't Cha lineup, just 2.5 months after opening. On October 31st, 1993, actor River Pheonix went into convulsions on the sidewalk in front of the club, suffering an overdose due to lethal levels of cocaine and morphine. Morbidly Hollywood tours still frequent the spot, with herds of snap-happy tourists clambering to stand on the spot. The passing of Hollywood star River Pheonix cemented the Viper Room's sordid reputation. At just 23 years old, River was poised to have a successful acting career when he collapsed outside of the Viper Room. It's not the first time Johnny Depp has been near the hot seat of the federal court of law. In 1999, Johnny Depp found himself in the middle of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit filed by his business partner, Anthony Fox. Just days before he was to testify, Anthony mysteriously disappeared, along with his truck and .38 caliber rifle. His truck was found 19 days later, but his body was never recovered. The disappearance remains a mystery. Fox had accused Depp of defrauding him of millions of dollars in profits and was due to testify against his business partners. In 2004, Depp turned over his share in the nightclub to Constance, who resold it. Rumors and conspiracies swirl around the disappearance. Anthony had a history of doing a disappearing act. His mother supposedly helped him commit fraud previously. However, some believe he was murdered and his body still remains buried in the building. EVPs have been caught, and one person who worked for 16 years refuses to go into the room he calls the pit. The room allegedly encasing a body. Given the death of River, mysterious disappearances, and the mobster connections, it would make sense for some interesting ghosts to be hanging around. The most interesting professional visit happened in 2017 by the Ghost Adventures crew. During Rita's decade-long tenure at the Viper Room, she's experienced some pretty unexplainable things. They went into a quieter area and were able to capture voices on tape that Viper Room employee Rita Fiora believed to be River when he said, "I get confused. I've had my hair yanked, a hand on my leg. Oh yeah, they're grabby, the guy ghosts." But there's a chick ghost too. She was texting me once from a dead number. I'd talk out loud to her, and she'd text me a response. She was mad that I couldn't see her. Sad. One bartender who had worked at the Viper Room for 16 years said that he felt like the bottom bar had a different energy than the top, a more malevolent one. He said he felt a constant pressure in his chest whenever he was down at the bottom bar, and that he had even seen glasses fly off of tables on their own. According to Rita, the spirit of River Pheonix isn't the only entity inside the club. Some claim that the bar is the site of a portal, an opening to the spirit world that can't be seen. Was the Viper Room covering up a murder? River had returned to LA from Utah while shooting what would be his final film, Dark Blood. After a day of shooting in LA, River was coming down with a cold and wanted to sleep it off in his hotel room as he had important meetings the next morning. Siblings Joaquin and Rain were in town to visit and wanted to go to the Viper Room, but were underage and would need a celebrity escort to get in. Samantha, his girlfriend, volunteered, and River planned to stay behind, but got a call from his friend Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, inviting him to play on stage. A last-minute decision, River grabbed his guitar and ran to meet his girlfriend and sibling. Upon arrival, River was told by Flea that there was no room on the stage for him, and he could not play. He then sat in a booth at the back of the club with his group. Jean Spangler, who had recently quit the Chili Peppers and was suffering heroin addiction, was close friends with River. Knowing that River was bummed out about not being able to play on stage, he handed River a Dixie cup filled with unspecified liquid and said, "Drink this, Riv, it'll make you feel fabulous." Unquestioningly, River knocked back the cocktail, which was later discovered to be a mixture of 8 times the lethal amount of cocaine and 3 times the lethal amount of heroin, as found in his autopsy report. There was no drug residue or inflammation found in his nasal passages, no needle marks on his body, and no alcohol found in his blood. After downing the drink, River soon vomited on himself and the table and passed out. When he came to, he began trembling violently. "What is this shit?" he asked, and quickly took a Valium to calm himself down. He could not feel his tongue or his mouth. Samantha later told filmmaker and friend William Richard that River was desperate to get out of the club and that she helped carry him outside, where he promptly collapsed and started to have seizures. John Frusciante told a panicked Samantha to leave him alone and that she was spoiling his high. There was a delay in calling 911. The young people present were not sure whether to call their agents or paramedics due to River's celebrity status. Rain threw herself on top of her brother to stop his face and hands from smashing into the pavement as his body seized. They watched him thrash helplessly on the ground for nearly 10 minutes before a paparazzi convinced Joaquin to call 911. By the time they arrived, River was unresponsive. Flea rode in the ambulance with him. From the time he'd walked into the club to the time he died, it had been only 40 minutes. Biographies about River continued only to refer to the drug pusher as a guitarist friend. But River's father gave an interview in 1994 to Australia's TV Week magazine, which corroborates the story that it was John Frusciante who gave River the deadly drink. He is only 23, the same age as River when he died, but he has a lot on his shoulders. He's keeping out of my way because he knows I'm looking for him. If you see him, tell him I'm going to strangle him. No, don't print that. But tell him he's an asshole. He's very rich, but he is a heavy drug user, and now he is a pusher. With River, he was like, do drugs, do drugs. If you run into him, tell him he may have gone back into the woodwork now, but he'll answer. I want him to know that I think he's scum. Print it and let him see it. He insinuated himself into my son's life, and River was too sweet to eject him. River was moving away from drugs and was actually trying to get this guy off heroin himself. River booked him into a farm, talked to him for hours, invested time into him. But the guy broke out and dragged my son down with him. Now he is alive, and River is dead. Where is the fairness in that? An enigma remains because his death was never properly investigated. People close to the incident refused to speak, which produced a vague police report. The media took the usual liberties of using sensationalism to sell their stories, and certain rumors have never rested. Apparently, Johnny Depp had no telephone in his office. Or isn't it more likely that everyone at the club wanted to immediately distance themselves? Had someone told the ambulance driver about the lethal overdose handed to River in a cup, he could have possibly received a life-saving shot of Narcan. It wouldn't have helped for an overdose of cocaine, however. In any case, he was ushered out of the club and left to deal with it. His sister sat on his chest and legs to stop his seizures. How long was he inside the Viper Room overdosing before he was taken outside? Was he kicked out, or did they take him outside willingly? Reports vary on this. Why did Joaquin, Rain, and Samantha mention the Valium, but say nothing about the poisoned drink? Why, with so many supposed friends, and over an extended period, did they do nothing?